What is up, you guys? My name is Aubrey and this is my channel, and we have some less than stellar news coming out of the SBA. It was recently reported that the SBA was putting millions of dollars in payments on hold, and in some cases was even potentially taking back payments that were received for COVID relief. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down what this means, who this affects, and of course, what it means for you. So let's get started. The Restaurant Revitalization Fund was a program implemented in the American Rescue Plan, which was the stimulus package that was passed in March of this year, so just a couple of months ago. Now, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund was a program that was created to help restaurants stay open. Since the pandemic, the restaurant industry is one of those industries that have been most significantly impacted by the pandemic, and because of that, many restaurants have been forced to close, and a lot of restaurants have had to file for bankruptcy. One way to help combat this and to help restaurants survive and even recover from the pandemic has been this Restaurant Revitalization Fund, which is a fund that allows for restaurants to get up to $10 million in grant funding, depending on how much money they lost during the pandemic. And this money would be in the form of a grant, which means they do not have to pay it back. The intent behind this is to keep restaurants open rather than shuttering them because of the pandemic and the effects of the pandemic. Because even though we are on the tail end of the pandemic and things are getting better and we are so close to the end of the tunnel, there is still the risk that some of these restaurants simply will not be able to recover, especially whenever it comes time to start paying back idle loans. And thus, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund was created. Now, in order to qualify for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, you had to have a business that focused around food or drinks. So for example, you could have like a restaurant, a bar, a pub, a brewery. You could have a fast casual restaurant, a food truck, a food stand. Basically anything that would be considered in the food and restaurant industry would qualify. But the problem is that the first few weeks of the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, there was a specific group of people that were prioritized for this fund. And that group of people was minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, and women-owned businesses. And these three groups of people were prioritized above everyone else for this fund. Now, this decision, unsurprisingly, has received quite a lot of backlash. The idea of prioritizing a specific group of people versus other people simply because of the fact that they're a minority, they're women-owned, they're veterans, it is something that has received a lot of backlash by a lot of other business owners. In fact, this is something that I hear on a near daily basis when it comes to the targeted idle cash advance and the supplemental targeted cash advance. The criticism that I hear for those programs almost all the time is the same exact thing, that it should not be targeted, and because of the fact that it is targeted, it is leaving out millions of people. The same criticism was had here with the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and there was a lot of debate about whether or not the SBA had any authority to make it as targeted as they did. Now, the thing that really added fuel to the fire here is the fact that the Restaurant Revitalization Fund ran out of funds before it opened to the general public, which means that this priority group of people, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and veteran-owned businesses, they took up 100% of the Restaurant Revitalization funds, which means anybody that was outside of this priority circle did not get any funds at all and simply didn't even really get a chance to be considered. Well, it was reported over the weekend that there had been a number of lawsuits filed against the SBA for discriminatory practices, and as a result, it was reported that the SBA had rescinded 3,000 approvals for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund in response to this. This is the exact notice that the SBA sent out, and this screenshot was found on Reddit. I will include a link down in the description below. Dear applicant, we regret to inform you that due to recent court rulings, the U.S. Small Business Administration will not be able to disperse your Restaurant Revitalization Fund award. Through the American Rescue Plan Act, the SBA launched the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, which prioritized applications from small businesses owned and controlled by women, veterans, and socially and economically disadvantaged individuals for the first 21 days of the program. After the SBA launched the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, 3 lawsuits were filed challenging the 21-day priority application period, 1 in the Eastern District of Tennessee and 2 in the Northern District of Dallas. These lawsuits have led to 3 adverse court rulings against the SBA. The SBA is not able to pay 2,965 priority applicants, including yourself, who were previously approved and notified of their approval. SBA will not pay these claims because the legal conclusions in these court rulings would preclude payment. Yesterday, the Department of Justice, on behalf of the SBA, filed a notice and a declaration in the Northern District of Texas and the Eastern District of Tennessee to notify the courts that these 2,965 payments would not be made. SBA's leadership is frustrated with this outcome and remains committed in doing everything we can to support disadvantaged businesses getting the help they need to recover from this historic pandemic. And then it says, sincerely, Office of Capital Access, U.S. Small Business Administration. Now, as of earlier this week, the SBA has already distributed the vast majority of the restaurant revitalization funds. They were allocated about $28.6 billion, and they've already gone through 27.4. So there's only $1.2 billion left of the fund. And it looks as though, as of right now, the applications will begin to be distributed in order in which they were received, no longer by priority status. And so rather than prioritizing groups of people that are either socially or economically disadvantaged, veterans, or women, it is now going to be in the order in which the applications were received. So even if you were somebody that received your Restaurant Revitalization Fund approval notice, that simply does not mean that you will receive the funds any longer. Now, this is really bad news for anybody that was counting on getting the fund, and it's really bad news for anybody who received the approval notice. Now, I'm not here to debate the legitimacy behind a priority group. I'm not interested in giving my take on that, and I just feel like the topic is something that isn't worth having here. But regardless of that entire debate, it is something that would be very hard to receive your approval notice just to have that approval rescinded a couple of weeks later. And for those of you who have received, EIDL loan, PPP, EIDL grant, you know what it feels like to need government money and to rely on that money in order to survive, and to then have that money rescinded is something that would be a really tough blow. But ultimately there has to be some blame placed on the SBA and lawmakers. They should have known roughly how many people are going to apply to this. I mean, they have the data, they know how many businesses exist out there, they have a decent idea of how many businesses may need this fund. And for them to create a program that ran out of funding in 3 weeks during its priority period is inexcusable. Regardless of the validity behind a priority program, this program should have received more funding. There should have been more transparency about how this program would work, and there should have been safeguards in place to ensure that people outside of the priority group could have received funds. Ultimately, though, I am really interested to see what happens with this. I feel horrible for the people who had their payments rescinded. I really, really do. I feel horrible for the people who were outside of the priority group and thus maybe left out as well. Really, I feel badly for any restaurant owner that needed this fund and is now at risk of not receiving it. But ultimately, I think that this really exposes the SBA to different lawsuits. I mean, I could see there being lawsuits for the priority group members who didn't get their funds. I could see more lawsuits from non-priority group members who missed out on their funds. I mean, I think that all in all, this is a legal liability nightmare for the SBA. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out over the coming weeks. Now, it is important to note that there is currently discussions to give the Restaurant Revitalization Fund $60 billion and more funding, which would be extremely substantial to the program as a whole. And to be quite honest, it is very much needed for this program. But there is a real valid argument to make that time is money here. I mean, there are restaurants that are struggling to survive, and the longer that this bill takes to pass, the longer that it takes for money to be distributed, means more and more businesses are going to close in the meantime. So there is a real sense of urgency behind this effort. There is a real time-sensitive issue here, and unfortunately, in the case of the SBA and government, there is no such thing as urgent, and there is no such thing as moving quickly. And so that is something that is extremely difficult, extremely frustrating, and for anybody who is counting on the Restaurant Revitalization Fund and now will not end up getting it, my heart goes out to you, and I truly do feel bad. With that being said, you guys, I'll keep you guys updated as this progresses if we get any more news on the Restaurant Revitalization Fund and what is ultimately going to happen with this fund. Remember that the targeted EIDL cash advance and the supplemental targeted EIDL cash advance should be opening up to the general public like any day now. We are simply waiting for guidance from the SBA, so stay tuned for that as well. And like always, if you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.